everybody. Scott Tunmer here with HybridPathways. I'm sitting here today with Roland Cloutier, who is a global Chief Security Officer and Digital Business Enablement Executive. He was recently inducted into the IDG CSO Hall of Fame, recognized as the CISO 100 Tech Exec Network's Information Security Executive of the Year, recognized as one of the most influential people in cybersecurity by Security Magazine. And he is the author of Becoming a Global Chief Security Officer, a how-to guide for next-generation security leaders.
Scott, any chance you can write my review for next year? Because that was awesome, man.
All right. Yeah, well, I'm just going on the script here, so we'll see. So today we're talking about getting identity right. And I thought in preparation for this, I actually looked up the word identity in the dictionary, and I came up with condition or character as to who a person or what a thing is, the qualities, beliefs, etc., that distinguish or identify a person or thing. And I had this Billy Madison moment where I became dumber after having read it. So I wonder if you could start us off on the right track, and what would you say is a good working definition for identity in the context of cybersecurity?
Scott, I actually have never looked up identity in the dictionary, so thanks for doing that. But I think it hit on what I believe, at least in our space and what you and I do for work, I think is most important. It's not just about the person, right? It talked about a person or a thing. And in technology, if we're going to do this right and ensure that our organizations understand identities, enable identities, and protect our businesses and the consumers that use our technologies, we have to get it right in having the entire life cycle of people, technology, applications incorporated into how we define identity, right? Often we focus IDM programs or identity management programs specific to our people or our users. But in the reality of data management, infrastructure assurance, and all the wonderful things we do, we have to understand everything that inhabits and lives within that ecosystem we build and operate.
Okay. What are common misconceptions about identity, things that might be corrected? Because I think everybody has a sense of, I think I know what identity is, but until you start working with it and think about the specifics and how you should approach it from a cybersecurity standpoint.
So I think a lot of people understand the concept of identity and password or identity, password, and MFA. But when you talk about and use the broader terminology of the entirety of the ecosystem, there's things that we really miss, like how does identity and access integrate into encryption, or how do we think about token utilization across multiple assets or identities? So there's components that identities, whether technical identities or humanistic identities, have to interact with to create this larger program of IDM. And when we just focus on username and password or MFA or things of that nature, we're really missing out on the totality of what we have to defend against. If you're not protecting your key stores, or you're not protecting or doing token management, or you're not doing certain things along the rest of the chain of identity access assurance, then you're going to have some pretty big gaps that may come back to bite you later.
And so you talked about those components. How does an organization approach identity?
So first, I think we have to look at some of the bigger buckets of identity and what we're using it for. I think we have to understand our business internally, our business use, so what our business is and what we are accountable for. Then I think we have to take a crawl, walk, run. I'm a big believer in threat surface reduction, so understanding what the bigger problem set is or the bigger environment is, and then removing things we just don't have to worry about. Cleaning and optimizing to have good data, right? Data in, data out, junk in, junk out, that sort of thing. And then focus on applying better identity capabilities. So what's better for machine identity versus humanistic identity, and maybe you're in an environment that does mobile identity. What's better for that? So taking it in pieces and parts and doing reduction, cleanup, and then focused improvement of your identity capabilities over time.
That's a lot of buckets. Is this all sit on the CISO's shoulders, or how do we spread the love, so to speak, so that not one person, maybe one person has accountability for it, but not responsibility for everything? How is that spread out so that everybody gets a piece of that pie?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of accountability here. Often IDM programs fall within the bailiwick of a CISO. I'm not a big believer in that, by the way, and not because I don't like doing identity management, and because I believe it's part of a integrated technology business process that CIOs should have authority and oversight over, right? You're enabling businesses through the use and protection of identities to do something, and that often has to do with the revenue focus of the organization, not just the operating of the organization, but the revenue focus. And so CIOs should have a really big say in this, if not have authoritative management over it. And I know, I'll get 1,000 questions on that later. Because there is a strong security focus. So obviously CISO has to be involved. And whether that's from a controls perspective, an assurance perspective, or even an operations point of view, that the CISO is involved. But then again, this is 2023. And so as we start to think about all of the changes, think about it, 16 new privacy and data assurance laws globally last year alone. The Chief Privacy Office has a big focus on this as well, because part of the assurance that they give to protect the privacy and information of an organization or the data entrusted to that company has to do with identity. So I think they have to be involved. And finally, at the core of everything we do, typically in technology, is data. Sure, there's infrastructure access, there's cloud platform and architecture management that has identity, typical AAA defense of an organization. But from a go-to-market point of view, you have to think about what are people getting at, or what are organizations trying to enable, and that's the use of data and protecting that data. So CDOs, organizations with chief data officers, they have skin in the game too. So we all have responsibilities, from the developers to the operations teams, to ensure that we're doing it right. We agree on how to do it, and that it's purpose built for the type of business and the type of services we deliver.
Great, thank you. So you mentioned in there laws, which is a good segue into my next question, which is really, we defined identity, we kind of know how it should work, and some of where the responsibility and accountability lies. So what? What does that mean to, say, a highly regulated business? And I think about pharma, and I think about finance, and I think about GDPR, and I think about GXP and HIPAA and CCPA. Oh wait, no, now it's CPRA. And
you're making me sweat, man.
Changing alphabet soup of jurisdictional requirements. What are the regulators really looking for, and how can identity help with that?
Okay, big question, and really big issues, and a big part of our jobs. I talk to a lot of my peers that are in the dedicated critical infrastructure or regulated space like finance, and a lot of their jobs have just become managing regulatory pressures. But I'll tell you what, there is just a truth to, you can be a very small company operating internationally, and now you're a regulated entity, or you deal with some specific type of high tech, and that makes you a regulated entity. It doesn't matter what country you're from. It matters what country you operate in, and it matters what type of data or infrastructure you manage. So the issue is that we have cyber laws. We now have privacy and data protection laws. In health and healthcare, we obviously have health regulations. We have, FDA regulations, Rule 11. We have obviously all the financial laws, Every single industry has its own regulatory oversight, predominantly for the most part. All 19 critical infrastructure segments have their own things that they have to adhere to. And here's the punchline. They all have something that says you have to manage your identity. And broadly speaking, they all say that you have to have a specific level of requirements of access to your infrastructure, your protected platform and environment, and your operating environment. So there's complex requirements in most regulatory things today that give pressure on regulatory compliance to us, the men and women that have to implement, monitor, assure it, and manage those controls. And frankly, there's an expectation from consumers that we're doing the right thing on their behalf, of not just providing them a service, but enabling the protection of the data that they've entrusted to us. So there's a lot of pressure there.
Okay, now I see you, Roland, you didn't bring your crystal ball today, but I'm going to pretend that it's there, unless it's off camera, and ask, what's your peek down the road? What can we expect from regulators in the next few years, and how do we prepare from what in your mind is coming?
A lot of the same. I mean, here in the United States, you're not, I just don't think you're going to see a comprehensive federal level requirement that solves all of the independent issues of each part of the republic. It's just not going to happen. Different political pressures require different states to implement different things. So I think all we're going to see is an increasing amount of regulation, both in the data privacy, data protection, and cyber defense area for most businesses. I think you'll see this going from critical infrastructure and public companies into companies that manage, possess, and operate information of consumers, citizens of different countries. And you've seen this in different parts of the world, in Eastern Europe, in Europe. Brazil has very progressive laws around this. South Korea. India took one of the most advanced steps in ensuring cyber and data protection to their companies as well. So again, wherever you are, we'll see continuing independent requirements through multiple jurisdictions on not just identity, but how to protect your business in their jurisdiction. So we'll see a lot of that. And I think the pressure is going to be on access to data flow. All of that has to do with identity. Where's my information? Who has access to it? Where did it go? Prove it to me. You're seeing some of that played out in being able to right to know, right to be forgotten. That's all principled around data or data assets or technical assets and an identity and how they're joined together and tracked. And so we're going to be required in a very broad way to understand the relationship between technology and data and the identity itself, and be able to do a better job at monitoring and tracking that.
So you mentioned a lot of places and countries in that last answer, and I know we worked a little bit before in the past, but I know you have a very global mindset, especially when it comes to thinking about risk, how we tolerate risk, how we treat it, how we approach privacy. How do you get that global piece right?
I think globalization for organizations is actually the great enabler, because if you can provide answers to those questions I asked a couple minutes ago, you immediately become kind of compliant. If you can show any given jurisdiction the truth around and transparency around your protection of their citizen data, which is what they're focusing on, and you do that through dedicated infrastructure and identity assurance programs, then you kind of change the game. You can operate anywhere. And think about it. I know where the information is. I know who has access to it. I know where they touched it and where from, and I know where it went. If you can do that through an enabled IDM program, you now can accelerate your business. You become, instead of the office of no, the office of yes, and let's go faster. Because when that requirement comes in and says, hey, we'd like to do business in Brazil, and you look at the top 14 things that the Brazilian regulators are asking for in that space, and you say, yep, we do that. Let's go. We can go to market faster than our competitors. You become an incredible part of solving hard problems for your business. So I think globalization is an opportunity for us in the security, risk, and privacy enforcement space, using these identity capabilities or these next generation identity programs to actually help speed our business to market. I think it's an exciting time right now.
Let's look at the flip side of that. What happens if you don't get it right?
Bad juju, man. Bad juju.
Bad things, very bad things.
Bad things. I mean, you see some of the criminal investigations, and you see some of the civil forfeitures and fines that that organizations in the billions of dollars that they have faced over the last few years. The reality is some of these laws are getting so specific in requirements is that you may not be able to operate in a given jurisdiction if you are mismanaging or unable to protect the interests of the citizens of that country. So I think there's that, right? You're not able to do business, but the totality that takes on an organization when you have a major data breach due to mismanagement of identity or inappropriate implementation of identity programs to defend the right level of technology or information you're trying to protect. The impact to the brand, the impact to your teams, your technical and operations teams are having to live through that. In your relationships with your regulators, they all take a hit. Your regulators with the consumers all take a hit. And it takes a lot to come back from that. So at the worst case, you lose a lot of money and you're not able to do business. At the best case, your brand takes a pretty big hit, and it's a lot of pressure, I think, on your company.
And then maybe I'll turn it one more time and say, beyond the lessening the pain points, we don't want pain. We don't want those bad things to happen. We want to keep the regulators happy. But from a moral or ethical standpoint, why is it just the right thing to do to have a good identity management program?
Listen, I'm a lifelong, career-long security person. So, I just believe it's the right thing to do. I think ethical organizations that monetize their technology services, capabilities, products, and take that to market, and in the process commit to a certain level of delivery or a certain level of protection of information, they should do it. And making sure that you have the right capabilities for sustainability of operations for your shareholders if you're a public company. All of these things are important, and it all, identity is one of the most basic fundamental cores to that. Like, we used to worry about networks and data centers being turned off if we, or held hostage if we did identity wrong. And, now we're worried about who gets access to specific types of data. We saw implications to critical infrastructure and supply chains on the energy side. And on and on. These are real issues. Technology runs our lives today. And if we're going to be in this and say that we're protecting this business, the societies that we live in, core and fundamental to, since they've been the Rainbow series, for those of you that remember that, how you're supposed to protect confidentiality, integrity, availability, those basic things operate on AAA, and access and identity assurance is the core of that. So if you're going to be in business and you're going to use technology and you're going to monetize, data and information, it's just the right thing to do.
Thinking a little bit about preparing to execute, I'll say, not executing yet, but we know that one person can't carry that whole mission, right? That there are other, let's say, overlapping responsibility areas or mission areas. So I think of the CISO, the chief privacy officer, the chief data officer, you mentioned chief risk officer. It seems like identity can sort of be the glue, or good identity management can be the glue that brings those areas together and maybe creates a sum that's greater than, or a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts, to use that expression, right? That's a force multiplier in some way.
Scott, I love that term, force multiplier. It really is. Let's start with the basics. Identity management isn't easy, right? First, it's hard to find people that do this and architect it and implement, and then you have to operate it. And it takes business change. It really does. Whether it's internal with your own employees, I mean, think about the changing workforce and the changing work locations and hybrid work environments. How do you manage identity in that space? It changes how people work. It changes how consumers engage, or your customers engage with you. And most of the time, by the way, it can be for the better, right? In so many different ways. And whether that's from a security perspective or privacy perspective, but it changes it. So you need business support. And when you engage your partners that have, like you said, skin in the game, right? Like a CPO, they're on the hook to ensure that the company's adhering to privacy regulations and requirements from the jurisdictions we operate in. Chief risk officers have to ensure that we're meeting the risk requirements, either as a public company or a non-public company, that is expected of the organization in the industries we're in. And we can go on and on to other people. The important point is, by architecting the use scenarios and the outputs for assurance of privacy and assurance for risk reduction and the assurance for oversight and transparency, you can get some really, really help from really smart executives in your organization that have a shared interest. And together, going in as a force multiplier to senior levels of the organization to talk about change, to drive change, and why it's good for the go to market, why it's good for the business strategy, why it's good for business acceleration, why it's good for you as a public company. All of these things together as a shared responsibility is way better than a CISO going in and people sometimes, unfortunately, look at as a paid paranoid, although just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you. So, going in from a business perspective, a regulatory perspective on a shared focus, it's a win-win. And so spending some time with your partners and creating partners in that space is more of a business effort necessary than it is a security effort.
So once you get that buy-in and you start to work with your partners, and you advance or you implement a solid identity management program, how does that affect the capabilities of the business? Are there things you can do now that you couldn't do before? And do you have any specifics to come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I've lived this over the last few years, where you go into all these independent jurisdictions, and every other week you're getting a letter from some organization asking you, to show this or show that. I mean, the attorneys in this space, God love them, right? You have, they have to figure out what governments are asking for and why, and what's the requirement to give to them. And, there's a lot of time and effort and energy focused on that. But what if at a push of a button, you can answer that? And then they can decide what to give. And it's not like, organizations taking a step back, having to do searches, compile that data, and looking, like you're trying real hard to find a needle in a haystack, but you actually have the capabilities. I mean, you're driving relationships with regulatory entities or, operating within those operating jurisdictions as a trusted company. It helps with a lot of things. And whether you're trying to get licenses in those countries, the business is trying to get those licenses or operate in those countries, it really, really helps. And that's just one. But I think the ability to be a trusted business, the ability to reduce constraints on doing work in certain places because you don't have the capabilities, again, helps drive that time to market and enablement of new technologies. If you have a flexible architecture and identity ecosystem that enables you to connect with a third or fourth party supplier in a certain areas, maybe you're allowing your business to reduce costs on something they shouldn't be doing, have a third party accomplish it for you, but have the same level of protection in your organization. That's another example. Or maybe a new technology comes out in AI, imagine that. And you want to be able to integrate that into your product pipeline, but need to do that in a very protected way, an assured way, between applications, technologies, or microservices in your environment. And you have a well-established identity capability and lifecycle. You can do that faster than maybe your competitors. So it helps out not just in answering the regulatory issue, it helps on driving your business and letting your business change quickly and go in the direction they need to be successful.
That's great, Roland. Thank you. So now I can tell you from personal experience, I have clients that I've worked with that will listen to everything you've said so far and say, that's great. I'm in. I want to do this. I know people that want to do this, but taking that first step can sometimes be challenging. They say Rome wasn't built in a day. We know things take time. Your identity management program will not be built in a day either. I've seen companies that are ready, champing at the bit to go, and they can't get funding for 8 months. What are some things that they can do now, or things even to prepare that maybe don't have a huge budgetary hit, or how do you grease the skids, so to speak, to move forward on this?
Yeah, and this is probably going to be the unexpected answer, because I know you got to bring in a third party and do a business plan and do this, and you certainly can do that, but I think the best way to start is to understand your own environment. Just document. How many identity platforms do we have? How do we do internal identity? How do we partner identity? Who manages it? Like some of the basic things around how many identities are there in each of these areas. When was the last time it was cleaned? When was the last time this happened? What protocols are we using? Why? How do we log and assure that information? Are we logging? Like some of the basic stuff of just writing down, here's what my identity framework looks like today in enterprise management, cloud, customer side, DevOps, all of it. Just what are we using and what technologies are we using? It doesn't cost a lot of money. It takes a lot of time to talk to a lot of people, depending on the size of the organization you are. But what you get out of it is a clearer vision and map of what's going on. The second thing you can do, limited money, no money, however you want to look at it, let's go clean it up. When was the last time that identity was accessed, right? First thing, grab it, create, sort, last time that identity was used. Go talk to the owner or the owners or the organization that owns it and say, we haven't seen this used in 2 years. Can we get rid of it? All of a sudden, instead of doing a dedicated cleanup and you have a threat surface that is 100,000 identities, maybe you're down to 60,000. Because you've killed off 40,000 that hadn't been used. And maybe that's a big number, that I've seen it. And I've seen organizations cut their work in half just by doing an initial cleanup. And be thoughtful and prepared for it, right? Like have if we screwed that up, then we know how to turn it back on. You turn it off for X number of days or months. We see companies that go in cycles, right? In different times of the year. You might want to go through 2 cycles to make sure that a specific process isn't using it, that's only used a couple times a year, right? However you do it, just make sure it's thoughtful. But when you get to that point, clear it out. Now you're starting the cleanup or the rebuild or the advancement with a much smaller slate. And so I think that's the next thing that I would do, and I've done before and works super well. And I think the third thing I would tell folks is, and again, this is probably not how most identity programs start, but I would look at the business strategy for the next 2 or 3 years. What does that mean for product? What does that mean for go-to-market? What does that mean organizationally? What does that mean for M&As? What does it mean? Ask all of those questions with your business people. Don't even make it a technology thing. Just sit down and say, where's our company going in the next 2 or 3 years? And then you can step back and say, how does identity impact that? Or how should it support and drive that forward? Then when you're sitting down with the experts or starting a project or doing an RFP, you have good information about your environment, good picture of your environment. You have a good steady state of where your environment is today, good, bad, or evil. You've cleaned it, and now you know where the business is going. That will greatly accelerate your capabilities to deliver faster a new IDM program, and do it in a way that the business will feel the impact in a positive way.
So for somebody who is maybe it's a CISO or maybe CIO or somebody who's in charge of IAM and wants to champion the advancement, what sort of barriers have you seen, or are there landmines to watch out for that words to the wise from somebody who's seen it? How do you pave that path for them?
Well, first, the sky is falling is no way to go, right? I've seen that. I've seen people get crushed on that. You can't just do this just from a risk management perspective. There's risk in everything we do. We operate to a very specific level of risk that the organization decides they're going to operate to. So there's technology risk, there's security risk in everything we do. So I think the risk path is probably not the best path to start down. You want that information. You want to be able to provide specific risk information about the technologies we're using, why they could be problematic. The focus should be on the business. The other landmines I've seen is trying to go too big, too fast. I mean, imagine you go from, I don't know, enterprise managed IDM, purpose-built IDM technology to a cloud integrated service provider. On top of that, you put new MFA capabilities. You're ripping and replacing your application stack authentication mechanism with tokenized management. And you do it, and you want to do it all in 2 years or a year. You're asking for trouble, right? You really want to take a staged approach, get solid components of your architecture in place, test and validate, move to the next one. And so take a, not necessarily a crawl, walk, run, but at least a walk, run, sprint, kind of focus on it. And then I think from my perspective, the last way, just to my peer practitioners out there, is it can't be a part-time initiative. This isn't Jimmy does this half-time, Sally does it 2/3 time. You're impacting the way your business operates. It has to be a full-time team. So if you're going to attack this as an organization, whether it's through a new operating team, because at the end of this, you're going to have to operate it, it's through an existing IDM team that pulls off certain resources to focus on the new initiative, or it's an 80-20 rule. You bring in consultant contractors for 80% of the build and 20% of the team while you're building it, and then convert it back over to full-time management while you need that scale. It just has to be focused, because you do not want to do start-stops and part-time people doing this. And I've been bitten in the past by that. And so I say that with a great deal of experience.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That sounds great, Roland. I want to thank you for the discussion today. I learned a lot. Hopefully everybody who's watching this also learned a lot. We're looking forward to our next topic, which will be all about cloud migration and how cloud migration can be a catalyst to advancing your cybersecurity program.
Thanks, Scott. One of my favorite topics at IDM, and follow up to that is cloud. So can't wait to have it.
And then we'll talk about IDM, and then we'll have to do a third one where we integrate the two and how they work together, right?
Sounds good.
This was good stuff. So if you'd like to learn more about Hybrid Pathways, you could email us. It's info@hybridpathways.com. If this is on YouTube, I guess there's a subscribe link down here somewhere. I'm reversed on my view of the camera, so I think it'll be on this side. So yeah, thank you everybody for watching. You stuck in with us this long. We appreciate it. And Roland, I will give you the last word, because as always possible, I forgot to ask something I should have asked, or something that you wanna wrap us up with. So last word to Roland.
We talked about a lot of things that could go wrong. We talked about the bad things that happen in companies that don't do this well. At the end of the day, improving your identity is simply improving your company, and improving your capabilities as security, risk, and privacy executives to really defend and drive your business forward. So it's a great program for any company to take on, and hopefully you get to do a new build or a new architecture yourself, and look to those that have done it before to make yourself successful.
All right. Well, thank you. Until next time.
And we're out.